Hello and welcome to Cold War Jets at Bruntingthorpe Aerodrome in Leicestershire. A fantastic event where you get to see aircraft of the Cold War period live, doing taxi runs, engine starts. So, without further ado, let's get down to the side of the runway and enjoy the first aircraft up of the day, which is the Handley Page Victor tanker.
Than the S for Strike aircraft that you see in front of you. They have Rolls-Royce Spey engines put in them, and that demanded a greater input of air, so the air intakes were enlarged. There's a rotary one, has a big pin at each end, so that the whole bomb bay rotates round, which no doubt you'll see happening, and the aircraft could carry 4,000 pounds weight of bombs, 4 1,000 pounders, 2 at the front and 2 at the back. So when the aircraft was bombed up and the bomb bay was closed, then in effect the bombs were being carried upside down. There were 4 pylons under the wings, of which unfortunately we don't have any, and they carried the Sea Eagle or the Martel anti-shipping missile. Just imagine what it's like to actually be shot off an aircraft carrier from a standing start with the engine on full blast, being catapulted into the air so that you're doing 160 miles an hour within virtually a couple of seconds. And then also when you're coming into land with your hook down and you catch one of the wires, you're jerked to a stop from the 160 miles an hour to nothing, again within about 2 seconds. Landing on an aircraft carrier is probably one of the most dangerous things that anybody can actually do. electricity supply, putting electricity into the aircraft to start it, rather than the aircraft using its own batteries. Obviously, power is going in because the anti-collision red light is flashing. And hopefully we should have the comet coming down onto the centre line of the runway before very long. I can hear the whine of the comet's engines, or at least one of them, so things look as though they're okay. That two Comet 4Cs, like the ones in front of you, actually made the first jet-powered transatlantic crossing in 1958, when one aircraft was positioned at New York Airport, the other one at Heathrow, and they actually flew off at the same time and crossed the paths with each other in mid-Atlantic. That was in October. That was the first transatlantic commercial passenger flight. This particular aircraft in front of you was always an RAF one. It never was an airline service one, and was used for all sorts of radar calibration work from Boston down in Wiltshire. this particular aircraft has got 3 seats because it was a research and development aircraft for the whole of its life. It's got a nose on it that is quite abnormal for a Canberra, because the normal Canberras were bombers, replaced the de Havilland Mosquito in the mid-50s onwards, and the normal nose was a Perspex one with a bomb sight in it. This particular aircraft was used for various numbers of trials, ending up with the testing of the radar of the Sea Eagle anti-shipping missile, the equivalent of the Exocet of the French. And the radar guidance unit that this aircraft was testing was installed in the nose, and after the plane took off and the guidance unit was actually installed, then the plane became the missile. Right, we'll just stop that for a moment, because down the runway to your left, I noticed a lot of heads peering there. We have 2 very recently arrived aircraft. Unfortunately, at the moment, neither of them have got engines, so they're purely static, and if they move, they have to be towed. The one at the front is a 2-seat Jaguar, and it's in raspberry ripple colours because it used to belong to the Empire Test Pilot School at Farnborough. And for you registration aficionados, it's XX145. The one behind is a Sea Harrier Mark II, which came from Dunsfold on Wednesday. And that again, I'm afraid, is engineless. Probably the cockpit cover, the bit that slides back, is not there, because when I saw it come, there was a massive great hole in the top of it, and the second time I saw it yesterday, the cover had been removed. I've just been told that the Spitfire flyby is now 10 minutes earlier than is on your programme. It's 15:35, and it's coming from a display at Kemble, and it's 10 minutes early because the Shuttleworth collection display at Old Warden in Bedfordshire has been cancelled because the field there is waterlogged. So the Spitfire's coming 10 minutes earlier than scheduled on your programme. Flight was in 1949, but it was actually designed to a 1944 specification from the Air Ministry, and of course by that time it was fairly clear that the war was going in the Allies' direction rather than in Germany's. It came into service in May 1951, and the idea was to have 240 medium bomber Canberras in service, 240 aircraft altogether, but it turned out that there weren't enough 9,000-foot airfields in Britain, even though the idea was to actually have that many, and so some Canberras were sent to Germany with the 2nd Tactical Air Force instead. They had contributions in the Malaya campaign between 1952 and 1959, in Suez in 1956, in Indonesia between 1962 and 66, and also quite remarkably the United States Air Force decided that they needed a bomber like the Canberra to replace the Douglas Invader, the A-26 that is it, in Korea, because it was getting shot down too much, and they needed something faster and more able to evade Chinese and North Korean aircraft. So they ordered 2 B-2 bombers. when he holds his hand up and makes a sort of circular motion, a horizontal circular motion with it, that is the indication for the pilot to press the start button, and you should see smoke coming out of the vent holes in the port engine first, and then after he's done his wind-up motion again on the right-hand side, out of the starboard engine. So if you need photographs, that's the thing to watch for. I've just been told that the number 2 squadron of the Royal Australian Air Force that had Canberras, because as I mentioned they were sold abroad a great deal, did over 11,000 missions in Korea in the early 19th, in Vietnam, that's right, yeah, not Korea, it's too early, in the Vietnam War. If you missed that one, wait for the starboard engine because the effect will be the same again. Those spikes sticking up and down below the wings have just been retracted. Our air brake took me many years to realise that the camera had even got them at all. The aircraft is actually owned by 4 people, between them as a small consortium, and they keep it in superb condition. It's had a repaint, not recently, but a couple of years back, and various decals applied for the 60th anniversary of its first flight. And you can see the door at the side, which will be shut shortly, once the inspections are finished, and then it's all done. need to know that there's a T5 being made to fly at Stennis Airport in Mississippi, and various parts are held here at the airfield that occasionally are taken out there to aid that one's restoration. That's not flying yet, but it should be within another few years. So the design for what became the Lightning was issued in September in 1947 for an experimental aircraft request, which became the P1, the English Electric P1, P for Project. And that aircraft was a sort of Lightning shape, but lower on the ground, no belly tank, bit cover that was flush with the top of the fuselage rather than raised, and the air intake at the front was rather like an open-mouthed fish. And they made 3 of them, one of which they tested the destruction on the ground, so only 2 of them ever flew. And both of those survived. One's at Cosford, and one's in the Manchester Science and Air and Science Museum.
Ever been?
The first flight was on the 4th of August in 1954, and it went supersonic in level flight on the first flight. 7 days later, the first flight that was supersonic. So the P1, which didn't have a name at all, was developed into a supersonic fighter, and that was given the nomenclature P1B, and the other one was then retrospectively called the P1A. Of the P1B, 3 prototypes were built, and because it was such a complex aircraft, 20 pre-production aircraft were ordered, and the wings had a 60-degree sweep back, which was quite incredible, an angle for that sort of time, because 60 degrees was the angle of the shockwave in supersonic flight. And you get a shockwave from the nose and the tail, and that's why you actually get a double bang if you hear the thing. The first flight of the P1B was in April 1957, and that was XA847, and that aircraft still survives. In November 1958, for the first time it went to Mach 2, twice the speed of sound, and the Lightnings, the F1 version, came into service in 1960, and they were gradually replaced from the late 60s by Phantoms and then F3 Tornadoes much later. The squadrons of Lightnings were finally withdrawn in 1988. 287 aircraft were built for British use, including all single-seat fighters and two-seat trainers. And in addition, 40 aircraft went to Saudi Arabia and another 14 to Kuwait, which makes a total of 341 Lightnings of all sorts as a production total. That's quite a considerable number for Britain, 341 aircraft. Now, I haven't totted up how many survive, but it's more than just a few. But here we have the only pair that run under their own power. That's one engine start. You'll get the same again with the second engine. Just a quickie, I'd like to dedicate this lightning run to somebody called George Howard from Italy. He will be 8 years old on Friday. On Sunday the 26th of August, which is the Sunday bank holiday at the end of the summer. That would be my suggestion for you to put in your diary. Looks as though we're going to have one of the Jet Provosts out, possibly on at the same time as the Iskra. And of course the two aircraft were there to do exactly the same purpose. One for this country and one for one for Poland. The main difference, of course, is not in the strength of the engine thrust, but in the seating layout of the cockpit. The British one, of course, is in the time-honoured tradition of putting the two pilots side by side so that they've both got an equal view and the instructor can see what the student is actually doing and correct it if necessary. So the side-by-side seating makes for a much faster aircraft. Certainly it's not so elegant, but it certainly did its job properly. And its first flight was in 1954, in the middle of the summer, in June. And it had a long, stalky undercarriage, and two of those, with their long undercarriage, still exist. take it one at a time. Jet Provosts on the lineup and the tow truck. how many, but they were talking something in order about 1,500 sites. But whether that is spread over Friday, Saturday and Sunday with 500 each, I'm not sure. But all will be revealed in time. But you did say, yes, put the date in your diary, but provisionally not certain. Spitfire's coming over and it's flown by Squadron Leader Ian Smith, who is the person in charge of the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight at Coventry. It's got a Griffon engine and it's one of the very last Spitfires operated by the Air Force and was retired in 1957. the T7, which is the one you see in front of you, the two-seat trainer version, that has a 4-foot extension of the fuselage at the front to accommodate the widened cockpit, and so it actually is quite an elegant looking aircraft. 45 T7s were built altogether, and then 2 F4s were converted later to replace 2 that had crashed. And the T8 version, which looked the same but which was a navalised one with a hook under the tail, there were 10 of those altogether. So 57 aircraft altogether, of which 2 were replacements for 2 that had crashed. Now, I also mentioned earlier that we have 2 other Hunters here as well. There's another T7, which will take some considerable time to get into running condition. And in the temporary hangar is an X-F4, which was converted to a 9. The planes that you saw just unburnt fuel from the last time. Not the last time in front of you, but the last time we tried to start it. But there we are, it's working, wonderful. And I hope you got some really good photographs of the smoke coming out the bottom. So that's 25 quid just blown away to start the engine. But, you know, if the owner of the aircraft can't actually afford that, then they don't have one. Incidentally, this aircraft spent most of its life in the Middle East, based at Aden, with 208 Squadron, which is what the markings are on the aircraft. But it also spent a considerable time with number 8 Squadron as well. And this one is the... confused me for a while, but this particular aircraft was temporarily on loan to the Fleet Air Arm, and they put a different tail on it to the one that it had originally, and that particular temporary new tail had a hook underneath, and the tail just stayed on. So the tail unit is not original to the plane, but that's how it happens to be, and just left the hook. It did have one major sort of hydraulic leak on the wheels some while back, which was why those of you that have been here fairly regularly didn't see it for a little while. But then it had major work done on it in one of the two temporary sort of olive listen type hangers that are on the pan behind you, and now it's back running again in front of you. But as I say, they do take a great deal of effort to keep going, especially if you don't have paid engineering staff. So any of you that feel as though you could help, then that would really be very much appreciated. Just come and give me an indication of who you are and a card or something of that nature, and we can accommodate you. The difference between this and the comet in major appearance is that the Nimrod had an extra large lump put all the way along under the fuselage, which houses a massive bomb bay that's 48 feet long and was able to cope with stingray torpedoes, bombs, depth charges, anything else you care to mention. And the aircraft's main function was reconnaissance for enemy submarines out of the Atlantic, so we could actually follow them underneath the water, and if necessary, in a war, sink them by homing torpedoes. So all the extra bits on the top of the fuselage and on the wingtips are basically submarine detection weapons, so that it could actually spend long hours over the Atlantic or out over the North Sea tracking Russian submarines. They were retired early from the Air Force to save money, and the Nimrod's replacement, which was going to be a Mark IV, one of them was virtually ready to go into service a couple of years back, and they were unceremoniously broken up. And they had big fences put round them at Woodford in Cheshire so that they wouldn't be seen, and aerial surveillance actually spotted them being broken up, and they were then on the television. But there were eventually going, the original order was for 35 Mark IVs, but they were scrapped. And of course, 11 of the Nimrods were actually converted into maritime reconnaissance and airborne early warning aircraft, but the coordination of the radar in the nose and the tail never worked, and so they were scrapped as well. So that was earlier. So at the moment we really have no maritime reconnaissance aircraft out over the Atlantic or over the North Sea at all, because all the Nimrods that were able to perform that function have been grounded and they've either been broken up or withdrawn.